Hey, welcome to Hail Chatter. Thanks for joining us today. Oftentimes, meteorologists, we use the Storm Prediction Center outlook to kind of gauge what storms are coming our way. I'm sure that you've done that as well. But we cannot always rely on that outlook because sometimes a storm goes rogue and it pops up out of nowhere. So don't ever trust a marginal risk. Again, we are talking about the wildest storms that have popped up outside of risks or in a marginal risk and become one of those major 4- and 5-star hailstorms. And we are here today with lead meteorologist John Choquette. I'm meteorologist Taylor Cox, and from our Detroit office, Collin Hunt. So how this topic came about was we went back to 2024 and we saw some of the biggest hailstorms across the entire season. They often happened in a slight or in a marginal risk, which we would consider a very slow weather day, but that's not always the case. If you look at storms like Omaha, Chicago, Denver, not even a risk for that Denver storm. Oklahoma City in a slight risk, and Dallas also in a slight risk. So see, these are some of the biggest storms that we saw back in 2024, and they didn't happen in a high or a moderate risk. They happened in those level 1 or level 2 risks. So I think it's important first. Let's start out, John, how are marginal, slight, enhanced risk even issued?
Yeah, so the way the Storm Prediction Center works, these forecast levels, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, marginal, slight, enhanced, moderate, high, are more for spatial area, right? So you have storms where, the big days, the moderate risk days, the high risk days, the days that the news really cover a lot, they're expecting a really high spatial area of lots of severe storms. And those usually coincide with all the conditions are right for usually pretty violent storms. And to be honest, the Storm Prediction Center really focuses on tornadoes. That is going to be the main thing. I mean, that's the killer most of the time. Hail, it does more damage year to year unless you have a really crazy tornado year, but it's not as much of a risk to life. So what makes it difficult and why sometimes the messaging can get muddled is people see a high risk day and they're in the high risk and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to get these crazy storms. But really it's conditions are the most favorable possible for the most intense storms over a very large area. While a marginal risk day, especially when we get a little bit later on into the season where it's a lot warmer normally and you have a lot more instability in place, it's much more conditional. And by conditional, I mean everything is in place for a lot of severe weather to occur, but you usually have something like a very strong cap or something to keep it from storms actually forming. So yeah, a storm or two may form, but the chances are usually pretty low, and they say it's a 5%, right? So it's like 95% chance within 25 miles of any point within a marginal risk, you're not going to see storms. But that 5% does happen sometimes where, whoops, oh no, that storm formed. Sometimes it's in Kansas in the middle of nowhere. Other times it's Denver. So, and that, it's just kind of the luck of the draw sometimes where a storm will go. There are times like here at Hail Trace where we've seen, oh man, I think even though it's a marginal risk, I think for Hail Trace's purposes, it's going to be a much higher risk that day. There's quite a few days off the top of my head I can think of. People in Dallas watching this. April 12th, 2016, this was the Wiley, Texas day where the hail was so big it blew through the decking of the roofs. That day started out as like a marginal risk, but because there was a boundary in place, everything kind of lined up just right, you end up getting this one storm that rode the boundary directly into Dallas, and then you have this crazy event. We were able to see that ahead of time. There's obviously other marginal risk days. I mean, there's like a million of them here where it's like this, and this has to happen exactly right. And then you end up getting a crazy storm. And that's very difficult for the Storm Prediction Center to put out there for a risk area to then communicate to the public. So they really just kind of go with, hey, you have this moderate risk day. It's likely there's going to be some big storms this day. And I mean, we had that happen here on May 19th of 2025, schools canceled and stuff here in Oklahoma because it was a moderate risk day and they didn't want to risk, having something bad happen in the event of some big storms or something like that.
Because truly on those days, the National Weather Service or the Storm Prediction Center is looking at the most likelihood for loss of life or property. And so they're really, really focusing mainly on those big tornado risks. That's going to be the biggest threat to life. The hail risk, on the other hand, even if we have a really, really high risk for hail, it may still only be a marginal or slight risk because it's not as big of a threat to life or property. But you throw that tornado potential in there, that will increase that potential life threat, property threat on those days. So it makes sense that people are then closing their doors and saying, stay safe, stay home on those days.
Yeah, and that's generally how people seem to take it. So you have like this, what is it created for initially versus how the public perceives it. And then for the forecasters, Storm Prediction Center, they have to weigh all of that in there. I think we had our first moderate risk for hail specifically of the year so far on May. It was like, the Friday before we were recording this, May 16th, I want to say it was.
I think
May 16th. On May 16th, it was the
really
first.
Rare.
Yeah, and they don't issue those too often. And it was crazy. For here at Hail Trace, it was a crazy day. We had a lot of really big hail, and there was also some pretty big tornadoes as well. So it was a very active day. But then there's other days where you have this marginal risk. And from a spatial aspect for the whole United States, I believe like the September storm for Oklahoma City, that might be on here from last year. The only game in town was Oklahoma City. So if you were in Edmond or Midwest City, Oklahoma City, and that storm happened, you had a crazy severe weather day. But even if you're in Norman, it was nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
And the rest of the country, nothing.
And that is the definition of isolated, which is where you have a marginal risk because it's just one storm that happens to hit in the right place.
Yeah, and then we have the days where there's no risk and storms happen, and that's what I like to call meteorology is an evolving science.
We're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
And there was that one storm, Derek was talking about that on a previous episode. I think it was in 2018 of June, where Dallas got pummeled when there was like no risk, I think, even for storms that day. But you can kind of start seeing like, it's not even marginal risk. It's like, there's no risk right now. There's no risk of severe weather. And all of a sudden the storm pops up and it's a 5-star event.
Yeah. June 6, 2018 was particularly crazy. So that one happened in the middle of the night too. So really it was, I did like a whole case study on it. Basically it was everything coming together just right. It's like, why did the Thunder lose against the Nuggets game 1 in 2025? Everything came together just right for them to win right at the end. That's kind of how it happened for that storm. You had some storm.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Thunder's on the brain here lately, guys.
Yeah. I'm 2 episodes in a row, I'm wearing an SGA jersey. So, clearly I know my stuff. But we had a storm that was like 300 miles away and outflow bound. Basically the exhaust from a thunderstorm made it all the way to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It was early June. If you're from Texas and you live in Dallas, by the time early June comes around, it's hot and it's humid and you had a very strong cap in place. This outflow boundary came in and it got rid of the cap. And suddenly this storm erupts just north of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and moves south into the urban heat island that is the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And the storm just erupted out of nowhere and dropped 3-inch hail and ended up being the costliest hailstorm of the year on a no-risk day at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
And it's like, that's like the kind of the extreme cases. You have that. And then that same year later on, like the next week, was in Colorado Springs. And this is still one of the craziest things I've ever seen, where an outflow boundary from a storm in Kansas went all the way west to the Front Range. And for those of you who've never been to Colorado Springs before, there's this massive mountain just west of Colorado Springs. One of the tallest.
One mountain.
Yeah. And it hit the mountain, and it's called orographic lift, or basically the air has nowhere to go but up. And it caused a storm to form and drop softballs in Colorado Springs at like 4:30 in the morning.
Wow.
And no risk that day because it's like, what are the odds that this one thing made it all the way hundreds of miles, hit a wall basically, and then cause huge storms over population. And it had to be specifically Colorado Springs, not too far north, not too far south. It was, and those happen. Obviously I can think of them. They're pretty rare, but when they do happen, that's when usually I'll end up getting text messages or calls, or we get comments on our page being like, you guys get paid to be wrong all the time, so.
Any meteorologist has gotten that comment before.
That was interesting though, like the perspective from contractors and others in the industry, because like in the middle of storm season, like there's so many severe storms that it can become like fatiguing to see all these storms, even when they're seeing like, oh yeah, it's high risk coming up. And then they see, moderate or marginal risk, and they go, yeah, I don't need to pay attention to that storm. And that's, different even from like the beginning of storm season, or, a place that hasn't gotten hit with storms yet. I know, Taylor, there was somebody in, what was it, Chicago, and they kept commenting on your live streams going like, hey, what about Chicago? Are you going to get hit? And where if you told them they had a marginal risk, they'd be super excited. Which is probably different than Dallas. You're like, oh, marginal risk, and people kind of just ignore that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and storm fatigue is absolutely a real thing. So then you get this, what we would consider a level 1 risk. People think that nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
But you can get storms that go rogue all the time.
Yeah, and that's the part that's really difficult to communicate. I mean, I know I've had issue with that, because even here with Hail Trace, we live and breathe severe weather. But I mean, we're getting towards the end of May as of this recording, and I think the team's pretty tired. We've had a pretty big sequence, and especially when you get storms in the same area over and over and over again, and there's that psychology too of like crying wolf. You get a moderate risk, and like again, I mentioned it already, the moderate risk that happened in Oklahoma on Monday the 19th. Nothing really happened in Oklahoma City. So suddenly you have this crying wolf of like,
people live.
It's like, oh my God, nothing really happened. I had to go pick up the kids from school early, blah, blah, blah. I couldn't go out to dinner because the restaurants were closed, and nothing happened. We had one storm move through, and it was garbage, it was nothing. And then it's like, well, if the 4 out of 5 risk is going to do anything, I don't care about the 1 out of 5 risk and don't even pay attention. And then usually that's when people are caught with their pants down and there's a big storm. Because the average person isn't just like has their nose deep into their computer going, oh my God, all the forecast models, and seeing what could possibly happen, and then you end up getting a really big storm happening on a like Hail Mary pass of a risk day.
Yeah.
And those are the marginal risk days, is a Hail Mary pass. So like, oh, something might happen. And then, every once in a while someone makes the catch and you're like, oh, big storm.
Every once in a while things just go right for that to happen. And I love getting caught with your pants down. That's what we have to name this episode now.
Yes.
Great podcast name. Now, I do want to ask you a question. Your expertise and your years of experience here may be able to answer this for me. A lot of the events that we found that were kind of the out of the blue storms, some of those storms that formed in a marginal risk or maybe no risk at all, were later in the season, in the summer, or not even in the season at all. September 24th, Oklahoma City. Way out of storm season, but a big storm happened. Is that pretty common, or is that just something that we saw in 2024?
2024 had a bunch all in a row. I will say that, but it's pretty common. I mean, I've been paying very close attention to severe weather since 2014, and I'd say at least a third out of the really big events we get in a year happen in some low-end event, or low-end risk, I guess. It's a high-end event on low-end risk. And then you have like the ones that are the surprises. Like I say every single year, we're going to get one really big surprise storm, usually in the summer. We'll get one weird out of season storm or out of place storm. That goes into like our hail forecast every year. Like we may have kind of done away with the bold predictions a little bit, but in the past, our bold prediction cities were trying to basically take our guess at where's the weird place there's going to be a big hailstorm. Where's that low end risk day that you're like, oh, this is a nothingness day. The Met team can like go home early, and then suddenly it's, oh my God, and that's why we have like a big alerting system for us within the company. Cause sometimes something catches even us off guard, and that's why we have people on call for 24 hours. That one in Colorado Springs is a good example of one of our coworkers. She did the whole thing by herself.
Wow.
And then told us the next morning that we made a 5-star map, and that was pandemonium, but
Mother Nature will
yeah.
surprise you, though.
Yeah.
It keeps you on your toes.
Yeah. So I mean, like the September storm, I'm trying to remember exactly what went down with that. But again, it's just like usually you have some kind of boundary layer. So basically, I like to call them train tracks or supercells. You have a very localized area of favorable conditions for storms to form, and then a little train track for it to follow. And it seems like half the time it's the little train track ends at city. So, so like that stuff like
city
that.
here.
Yeah. So like that kind of stuff happens. Obviously, fairly rarely if you look at 365 days out of a year, but in terms of like severe weather season, kind of common. I mean, some of the biggest tornadoes usually are pretty obvious, like there's some kind of disturbance, extra level of spin, whatever, in place before the storms actually happen, and then they'll ride along that and be extra intense or whatnot. I'm just looking at 2024, and like we have plenty that like to happen in the marginal area where, it's the energy's there for that one storm. It's like, oh, I don't know if storms are going to form there or not, but if it does, it's going to be crazy. I mean, I know like when I was doing the forecast all the time, there would be days where when we have the hail forecast graphic, if you look at SBC versus our hail forecast graphic, the SBC would be like it's a marginal risk, but then on the hail forecast graphic, I'd have the purple on the map because, if a storm were to go, it's going to drop softballs. It's can a storm break the cap? Like even the record biggest tornado ever, the El Reno Day in 2013, you needed the convective temperature, I guess. So the temperature needed to get to like 98 or something for storms to form. And it was like, is that going to happen? And then it did. And it's like, whoop, there it goes. But it was like leading up to it. It's like, I don't know. That's pretty hot. I don't know if we're going to make it to that. And that's where, again, a lot of uncertainty comes into place and makes it difficult because obviously for a lot of folks too, if it's not hitting my house, it's like, well, it's a bust.
So that being said, let's get into some of these case studies here of some of these really big storms that happened in a marginal risk. We'll start with Omaha, June 12th. It was like exactly what you said. There was one storm in this entire area. Most of these storms were up in Minnesota. However, one storm came down, rode the Nebraska and Iowa state line and targeted Omaha. So what happened here? Let's see if we can get this to play. Just boom, right in the middle of the city.
Yeah, that one was wild. I remember watching that. So it was like northwest flow. So basically that's why you're getting it moving generally southeast. And storms want to go the path of least resistance, and they want to go to where there's the most energy. And Omaha is a city, and it's a lot warmer than the surrounding area, so it wants to go down that way.
That makes sense. And so that's exactly what happened. We've got another case study here. This one's in Dallas. So Memorial Day Mayhem is what I titled this one. It was in a slight risk. Okay, so we could see numerous storms in this area. But really what I was focusing on here is there were so many storms off on the East Coast. And then we got a few storms right into Texas. And so another one that we can talk about here was the largest hailstone was
3 1/4.
3 1/4, yeah. So over the size of a baseball, almost softball size hail. And I don't know if this
it was a super windbag storm too with 86 mile an hour wind gusts. That's a low end Cat 2 hurricane strength.
Yeah, strong wind as well. Again, that was over Memorial Day. There's some massive hailstones there. Now we have Chicago. I said that we had 2 rounds here, one early in the day, one later in the day, and that second round was just a big hailer in the Chicago area.
Oh, yeah, I remember this storm too.
And again, that was in a marginal risk as well.
Yeah.
And there's your
What
radar.
was the date for that?
May 7th.
Storm? May 7th, yeah.
Of 2024. Yeah, this one was wild too. I mean, obviously you have the days where it's like a really big risk and then nothing crazy happens. I mean, I was in Chicago for an enhanced risk the 15th. And all I heard the next day was people complaining, well, we had that tornado watch and nothing happened. Then we had a dust storm, so I don't know. I go places where there's weird weather, I guess. But, so it does make it difficult because, the average observer, they're going to remember the days where there's lots of hype and then nothing happens. They'll remember the days where there's lots of hype and something happens. And then they more remember the days where they don't know what's going on, and then something happens and they're mad.
And they're like, this caught me off guard. This surprised me.
Yeah, and this was almost definitely one of those.
This is a 4-star hailstorm.
John, it is so different than how I grew up. So growing up in Zambia in a subtropical climate, like it was a yes or no for storms. Like it storm season and it stormed lightning, downpour rain every day. And then dry season, no storms ever, which is so different than like the type of storms that happen year round here in the States.
Yeah, I mean, that's just being in the mid-latitudes. You know, you have more dynamic weather. You know, you get more into the tropics and it's just basically trade winds. So you get the wind coming where it's going to be moist and then wind coming where it's dry. So that's, you know, that's how like places like India and like, you know, Central Africa and all the other tropical locations have very intensely different weather, you know, and it's like one or the other. You know, so.
And that synoptic setup, that wide range, wide regional setup, it really is why it's so hard to forecast occasionally. Some of these days are extremely difficult to decide what's going to happen because we are just so perfectly set up in the middle of everything.
Yes, yeah. The United States is very uniquely set up. And that's why people around the world come here to come see tornadoes, because it's like probably the most consistent place in the world to see tornadoes, because we have a lot of volatile weather. We got the Gulf of Mexico, we have the Rocky Mountains, we have the Canadian cold, basically.
The cold air coming down.
Yeah, you know,
down from Canada.
Everything comes together just right in an area that allows for a lot of severe weather, a lot of unpredictability. There, you know, I think the thing that the average person may not really pick up on is just how the tiniest minute detail can be the difference between the high risk turns into a super outbreak to, man, it just rained a lot today, you know, so.
Yeah, and nothing terribly threatening happened.
Yeah.
But then you can have a very similar setup, a very small change, and you can have a complete outbreak.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you can get on the micro scale, and that's where you have the marginal risks that has like a crazy big storm that happens at it.
Yeah, and I think that's something to recognize here. We're not saying that the storm prediction center is wrong in these cases. We're saying that these isolated storms just happened to hit a city, and it was impacted a lot of people. So, I mean, yes, they were correct. There was one isolated storm out here. It just happened to hit a city and cause a 5-star, 4-star hailstorm for us.
Yeah, like it'll fit. When you look at how they construct a marginal risk, it's, there was a 5% chance of a storm within 25 miles of the location, and that, unfortunately, that location was San Antonio or something, you know.
Had a very dense population. Okay, so this is another one of my favorite case studies here, because it is the exact thing that we're talking about today, where we have mainly our risk focusing down in the central to western portion of Texas, and then all of a sudden Denver, which I think is one of those places that's very hard to forecast for, because the smallest change, especially with that air coming over the mountains, can produce a big storm. And that's exactly what happened on this day. You can see these massive hailstones that fell in Denver, and actually this day was so impressive.
Was this May 31st? Yeah, it was the May 30th, May 31st time frame. It was like late in the evening. Yeah, it's like one of the worst hailstorms that they have ever had, and it was the costliest of last year.
Not just one storm, but we've got another one that formed just in the heart of Denver.
Yeah, that was the one that messed up stuff pretty bad. It was a brutal hailstorm, you know, so that I would say in the 11 years I've been here, if there's one city that I would pick that the Storm Prediction Center consistently kind of flubs, it's Denver. And it's just it's the mountain,
it's just difficult
the orographic lift.
Yeah.
And you get just the right conditions and storms can get going. And it's amazing how many times where the end of the marginal risk will be like, you know, so here's like where the airport is, the end of the risk is here. And then they're like, oh, well, you know, where all the people live, it's fine. And it's like, well, what's different is a storm will form and start dropping massive hail like 5 miles from where it formed. And 5 miles where it formed is like Boulder or like the western burbs of Denver. And then it has, path of most resistance of like, Denver's a massively growing city and it just has tons of people to hit. And it just the last couple of years, we've had a couple storms where it's, typically Denver has hail. It's more uniform in size and it's like 2 inches or less. The last couple of years we've gotten like baseballs out of this, which has been like really crazy.
Yeah, that's something that I was watching for today. The date of this recording, the 22nd of May, is that we have a risk just on the east side of Denver. And I was like, but watch those storms in Denver because they will surprise you. They'll go rogue sometimes. But this was definitely one of those cases. $3 billion event, the costliest storm of the year, 98,000 structures in the path of tennis ball size hail.
Nailed it.
Got through it. There's some pictures of the hailstones that fell on that day.
Yeah, people were pissed about this one because it was, they got caught off guard. And in the evening, the ones that like later in the evening really suck because you're at home and you get woken up to it. Like if there's one thing I'm afraid of, living in Oklahoma City is I get woken up to thunk, 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 thunk on my roof and I go, oh no.
Come move the car, fast.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's too late at that point.
Yeah, at that point, it's like, well, I guess I gotta get a jump on calling some windshield replacement companies in the morning.
Be the first one to call because they get booked up very fast.
Yeah, they do.
One of the most recent storms that we saw in this category, no risk at all, San Antonio, you could see the bullseye for the storms on this day was mainly a tornado and a wind risk. And where did our 5-star happen? Not anywhere in a place that we even thought were going to be storms, right in the middle of San Antonio, really on the west side of the city.
And that happened like right around 5 o'clock. So for Hail Trace employees, I remember I was driving home and then somebody said, oh, storm form. I'm like, what? And then they're like, where? Thinking they were going to say like Orlando or something, at least somewhere in the general region. And it's like San Antonio. And I bring up radar scope on my phone and I'm like, oh my God, here we go.
It was right during rush hour. I'm sure a lot of people out in San Antonio were on the roads at this time, going from work back to home or back to dinner or whatever. And all of a sudden, they just got some massive hail in that area.
Of all of the ones on this list, this is probably the one where I sympathize the most with the people. And they go, there was no risk today. And I go, you're correct.
You're correct on that. There was no risk in the entire state of Texas.
I'm also like, oh, crap. Whoops, And it happens sometimes, it just, I don't even know what caused the storm to form. I'm assuming it got just barely warm enough for the cap to break and in that one spot.
Do you think that could be an urban heat island effect? I don't think so. It was early enough on in the year that we probably didn't have that diurnal heating for the concrete to absorb all of that.
Maybe.
Heat.
I can't opine on it because I don't exactly know what happened, but maybe. It was formed like west of this. Either way, see, this is a perfect example of we're learning so much, and that's the big thing, taking the time to do the research afterwards so we can get better. I'm willing to bet that our risk area, like verification to failing, has gotten better over the years because, I always say you learn the most for when you really F up, because you go in and you have a really bad forecast. You're more likely to go back and go, well, what did I do wrong? You
Monday morning quarterback it. Yeah. You watch your tapes and get better and learn from that. Yeah.
So that's if nothing else, that's like the takeaway of like, okay, so you have like a crazy storm happen in San Antonio. I guarantee some college kid's going to do like a case study on it. It's going to get published somewhere. And then, people go, oh, okay, in the future, I can look for these conditions and it's going to be more likely that storms are going to happen.
But all in all, the risks only tell part of the story.
Yes.
You can't rely on risks and say, oh no, why did a storm form out here? We've seen this before. This is going to happen again.
Yeah. Yeah. The big thing is, especially if you're just like a regular person, watch your local news and hopefully the local meteorologists, they'll have the most knowledge of the region that you're in. And like for here at Hail Trace, we have a fun smattering of people from different parts of the country, different amounts of experience, and that adds to the added insight beyond just, well, my Apple weather app said a thunderstorm icon today. Why no thunderstorm? You know?
If thunderstorm, then why no thunderstorm?
Yeah. Why no tornado? Sometimes I think people are like expecting like a big destructive tornado in their town or something. Like, I don't know.
We
It's
say
just-
in those cases, we are so glad that we're wrong. We hope to be wrong on those big days.
Yeah, the residents of Moore, Oklahoma don't need another F5 anytime soon. You know?
Yeah, we hope that we're wrong on those big days. But Hail Trace was live during the San Antonio storm. I did that from my car on that day because, again, it was the evening commute, and I pulled over and I said, all right, let's go live. Let's talk about this storm. And that's exactly what we did.
Especially at Hail Trace, we really like East Coast days because by the time it's 5 o'clock Central Time, most of the stuff has pushed off the coast, and we get to go have a nice evening with our families. And
not that day. San Antonio said, not today. Well, John, thank you for being here this afternoon. We appreciate you joining us to talk about don't ever trust a marginal risk again. You never know what's going to happen. Mother Nature will keep you on your toes.
Yeah, that's his whole job.
Yeah, meteorologists, like we're always ready for anything. And thank you guys for watching today. This is the last episode of the spring season, so don't forget to go back and watch our other episodes.
Yeah, and it's been a great several episodes. I mean, we started off with like, is there an off season? We had a hail forecast, 15 years of chasing tornadoes. It's been a lot of great episodes. So if you haven't watched those, go back, watch them, and then look out for the next season here in the fall, and we'll jump right back into Hail Chatter. Thanks, guys,
we'll be
for
back
watching.
for hurricane season. Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thunder up.